Javed Iqbal, the killer of 100 boys, a tale of unimaginable horror. Javed Iqbal Mughal, a Pakistani serial killer, stands among the most disturbing and twisted criminals in modern history. His story, a grotesque tale of abuse, murder, and manipulation, shocked Pakistan and the world in the late 1990s when he confessed to the murders of 100 boys. What makes this case even more horrifying is the chilling manner in which Iqbal executed his crimes, including sexual abuse, torture, and the ultimate disposal of his victims in vats of acid. Iqbal's ability to carry out these atrocities while evading suspicion for years speaks to the horrifying depths of human depravity. Early life of Javed Iqbal. Javed Iqbal was born in Lahore, Pakistan, in 1956 to a wealthy, respected family. He was the sixth of 8 siblings and had a relatively privileged upbringing. Despite this, Iqbal displayed signs of trouble from a young age, particularly in his interactions with authority figures and his propensity for cruelty. He often acted out, engaging in delinquent behavior, but nothing could have predicted the monstrous turn his life would take. Iqbal's early adulthood was riddled with criminal activities, and by the time he was in his 40s, he had established himself as a successful businessman in Lahore. He owned several properties, including a video arcade that became a popular hangout for local boys. It was through this arcade that Iqbal began to groom his victims, offering them food, money, and a safe space, only to turn it into a house of horrors. The start of a killing spree. By the mid-1990s, Iqbal had developed a growing obsession with young boys. He carefully targeted street children, those without homes, families, or support. These boys, often between the ages of 6 and 16, were already vulnerable, living on the fringes of society. Iqbal preyed on their desperation, luring them into his home with promises of food, shelter, and protection. Once they were inside, they would quickly learn that they had walked into a nightmare. Iqbal's method of killing was horrifying in its calculated cruelty. After luring the boys to his home, he would bind them, rendering them powerless. He would then subject them to sexual abuse, assaulting them repeatedly. Iqbal later described feeling a perverse sense of power during these acts, enjoying the helplessness and fear of his young victims. After satisfying his sadistic urges, Iqbal would strangle the boys to death. His method was deliberately intimate. He wanted to see the life drain from their eyes, to feel the struggle in their bodies as they fought for breath. He later recounted in chilling detail how he would watch the boys' faces turn blue as they suffocated, his hands tightening around their throats until they finally stopped moving. A house of horror. Iqbal didn't stop at murder. After killing his victims, he needed to dispose of their bodies. His solution was as grotesque as his killings. He purchased vats of acid, and began dissolving the boys' corpses in these containers. He would strip their bodies of clothing, dump them into the acid, and watch as the corrosive liquid slowly disintegrated their flesh. The process was slow and deliberate, with Iqbal often leaving the bodies to dissolve over several days. He would then dispose of the remaining sludge in a local sewer. Iqbal bragged about how efficient the acid was in dissolving the flesh, bones, and organs of the boys, leaving behind almost no trace. In many cases, the boys' belongings, such as clothes and identification, were the only things left to identify them. Iqbal's home in Lahore quickly became a house of horror, filled with the stench of acid, fear, and death. The walls of the home bore witness to the unspeakable acts that took place there, a place where innocence was snuffed out and lives were erased with horrific brutality. The boys who disappeared from the streets of Lahore became nothing more than a memory, their remains dissolving in acid, leaving behind only questions and grief for their families. The confession in December 1999, after years of unchecked violence, Javed Iqbal's reign of terror finally came to an end, under circumstances as shocking as the crimes themselves. Iqbal, rather than being captured, voluntarily turned himself in. On December 30, 1999, he sent a letter to the Lahore police and the newspaper Daily Jang, confessing to the murders of 100 boys. In his letter, Iqbal detailed the atrocities he had committed, describing the killings and how he had dissolved the bodies in acid. He expressed no remorse, instead blaming society for the conditions that had led him to commit such acts. Iqbal claimed he had been mistreated by law enforcement and the justice system in the past, which fueled his hatred and desire for revenge. The letter also revealed that Iqbal had kept a meticulous record of his crimes. He kept the victims' clothes, photographs, and identification cards in his home, essentially creating a macabre collection of trophies. The police, upon investigating his residence, discovered this chilling evidence, along with the vats of acid that still contained the remains of his last victims. A nation in shock. The public was horrified as the details of Iqbal's crimes came to light. Pakistan had never seen a serial killer of this magnitude, and the sheer number of victims, 100 boys, was almost unimaginable. The case sent shockwaves through the country, especially as Iqbal had preyed on some of the most vulnerable members of society, street children, whose disappearances had gone largely unnoticed. The families of the victims were left devastated, grappling with the horrific realization of what had happened to their children. The images of the boys' clothing and belongings, shown in media coverage, were all that remained of lives taken far too soon. The brutality of the murders, combined with the methodical way Iqbal disposed of the bodies, left a nation mourning for its lost children. Trial and sentence. Javed Iqbal's trial was swift and public. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his detailed confession left little doubt about his guilt. Iqbal remained emotionless throughout the trial, at times even arrogant in his demeanor. He continued to claim that he had been wronged by society and that his killings were a form of retribution. On March 16, 2000, Javed Iqbal was sentenced to death in a manner as gruesome as his crimes. The judge, in delivering the sentence, declared that Iqbal should be strangled to death in the same way he had killed his victims, his body then cut into 100 pieces, and dissolved in acid, mirroring the horrific fate of the boys he murdered. However, this sentence was never carried out. On October 8, 2001, Javed Iqbal was found dead in his prison cell, having apparently committed suicide by hanging himself with bedsheets. His death sparked rumors and conspiracy theories, with some believing that he had been killed to prevent further revelations about his crimes or connections within society. Legacy of horror. The case of Javed Iqbal remains one of the most horrifying in the annals of criminal history. His ability to murder 100 boys over the course of several years, all while remaining undetected, highlights the vulnerability of street children and the systemic failures that allowed these crimes to continue. Iqbal's crimes also left a lasting scar on Pakistan, where the case served as a grim reminder of how evil can lurk in the most unexpected places. The sheer scale of his killings, the horrific details of how he disposed of the bodies, and his lack of remorse make Javed Iqbal one of the most disturbing serial killers in modern history.